Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen and enjoy my stories every day. When I first started to notice the small shifts in my wife's behavior, I didn't want to believe it. After over a decade of marriage, 2 children, a beautiful home, and countless memories, it seemed absurd that any tiny detail could signal something so catastrophic. In our world, love was stable, secure, and solid. Doubts like these were only reserved for the early days of a relationship, back when I was young and unsure, back when jealousy might have sparked over the smallest flirtation or an unreturned call. But things felt different lately. She had always been attentive, far more than I deserved, I'd often joke, and she was organized, almost methodical in her daily routines. But there were these cracks now, small ones. She started to take extra care in her appearance even when she wasn't planning on going out. The days she would arrive late from work meetings became less occasional and more of a regular occurrence. I dismissed it as paranoia, thinking maybe she was just trying to rejuvenate herself, find something new in a routine we'd all grown comfortable with. But then there was the phone. It was late on a Friday evening, and I'd come home early from a work function. I thought it'd be a nice surprise, maybe we could enjoy a movie together or just spend some quiet time catching up. Our lives had grown so busy lately that even these small moments felt like gifts. I hadn't told her I'd be home early, wanting the surprise. I walked into the house quietly, savoring the quiet, wondering if the kids had gone to bed. There, on the kitchen counter, her phone lay, buzzing quietly in the dark. Without really thinking, I glanced down at the screen. It was unlocked. The message flashed up in bold, bright letters, "Can't wait to see you tonight. I'll make up an excuse about staying at my mom's." My heart felt like it dropped straight into my stomach. I reread the message, as if some mistake would reveal itself in the words, some twist of language that would transform this damning sentence into something innocent. But it was all there, in plain text. My mind spun. Who could she be texting? She hadn't mentioned going out tonight, hadn't even hinted at plans. I stood there, rooted to the spot, staring at the phone as if it could somehow explain itself. Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, to shout, to rage, to demand answers on the spot. But there was another part of me, colder, that just kept watching that message as I processed each word carefully, memorizing it for what would come next. She entered the kitchen just as I backed away from the counter, eyes bright with surprise at my early return. I could feel the tension between us, the dissonance of her excitement to see me and my numb disbelief. "You're home early," she said, masking her shock quickly, flashing a warm smile that once would have melted every doubt I'd ever had. "Yeah, thought I'd surprise you," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral, as though this moment were perfectly ordinary. I saw her glance quickly at the counter where her phone lay, a flicker of unease passing across her face before she regained her composure. "Oh, that's a nice surprise," she replied, laughing a little too quickly, stepping past me toward her phone. She scooped it up, her fingers grazing the screen, likely deleting the message the moment she thought my gaze had shifted away. I told myself that maybe there was an explanation. Maybe I was jumping to conclusions, overthinking things. I'd always prided myself on being a logical person, a grounded husband who trusted his wife implicitly. But the sick feeling in my stomach wouldn't go away. That message felt like a veil had been lifted, revealing the real reason behind those extra hours away, the new attention to her appearance. My heart thudded with every possibility, each one more painful than the last. Over the next few days, I told myself to remain calm, to wait and gather more evidence before confronting her. I watched her every move, analyzing everything with the critical eye of someone who needed to be absolutely sure before tearing down what we had built. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to be the suspicious husband, lurking in the shadows. But I also couldn't ignore the signs. It wasn't long before I started to notice other things that didn't add up. When I asked her where she'd been on nights she'd stayed out late, her answers were strangely generic, just out with friends, or a work dinner. Her tone would carry that hint of irritation whenever I asked, as if she were annoyed by my questioning. Then, there were the late nights at work. They seemed harmless at first. My wife had always been career-driven, and I respected that about her. But now, her work dinners would last longer, stretching well past reasonable hours. And it was never the same location, never the same friend. It was all scattered, vague details thrown together that didn't quite make sense when I pieced them together in my head. I would try to ask about her plans in casual ways, disguising my suspicion. "Where are you headed tonight?" I'd ask lightly. She'd tell me something dismissive, a quick brush-off. She was good at it, each answer delivered with ease, each glance quick, calculated, and a little too careful. I held my suspicions close, carrying them in silence. I needed proof. I needed something undeniable. For all I knew, this could be nothing but a misunderstanding, a bizarre coincidence that just happened to add up to something horrible. But my gut told me otherwise, and the feeling wouldn't leave me, no matter how many times I tried to rationalize it away. Finally, I took the next step. I began documenting every little detail I found suspicious, her texts, her location history, credit card charges that didn't align with her stories. I went through her social media, scrolling back through the photos, looking for anything unusual in the background, any hint of something that might confirm my fears. The evidence built up over the weeks, piling on top of each other until it was undeniable. Her lies were layered, woven into the fabric of our life so seamlessly that anyone on the outside would never have guessed. But now, the cracks were there for me to see, each one revealing something I hadn't wanted to believe. One night, after another of her late work dinners, she slipped into bed beside me. I could feel her warmth, her familiar presence, but it felt like a stranger lying next to me. My mind replayed the details, the lies, the betrayal I had now pieced together like a puzzle. I knew that whatever I did next would change everything. I knew that I couldn't go back to the way things were, that the trust I'd once had was shattered. In that darkness, as she drifted off to sleep beside me, I made a promise to myself. I would find a way to confront her, to finally tear down the walls of lies she'd so carefully constructed. But I would do it in a way she'd never see coming. For all the pain she'd caused, all the hours she'd spent betraying me, I would make sure she remembered the moment she lost me forever. After that night, something shifted inside me. Where I'd once felt confusion and doubt, there was now a sharp, cold clarity. I was done brushing off suspicions, done pretending everything was fine. I needed answers, and I needed her lies to be laid out so there was no chance she'd wriggle her way around them. I took my time, becoming almost obsessive in how I watched her, how I tracked her every move, her every word. I installed a tracking app on her phone, something I never would have thought to do before. Each location ping, each time-stamped place she visited, felt like pieces of a puzzle coming together, creating a picture I could hardly stand to look at but couldn't turn away from. In the evenings, after she'd gone to bed, I'd check the data, almost as if checking my own work, hoping there'd be nothing new but always finding something. One Wednesday night, she mentioned she'd be working late again. I kept my expression neutral, nodding as if this were any other day, as if I believed her. As she left, I slipped out after her, leaving just a few minutes behind. My heart was pounding, the adrenaline keeping me calm but alert as I trailed her down the familiar roads, through the turns, and out to the city's edge. She parked outside an upscale restaurant, dimly lit and buzzing with the after-work crowd. I watched as she exited the car, glancing around quickly before heading inside. And there, standing by the entrance, was a man I'd never seen before, dressed smartly, his posture casual yet familiar as he waited for her. They exchanged a brief embrace, her head tilting up to smile at him in a way that made my stomach churn. It was a small gesture, barely noticeable to anyone else, but it felt like betrayal incarnate. I sat in my car, frozen, unable to look away. The stranger held the door open, and they disappeared inside. The weight of what I'd just seen finally settled over me, heavier and sharper than anything I could have imagined. I took a few deep breaths, my mind a jumble of emotions, anger, disgust, heartbreak. I almost wanted to storm inside, make a scene, let everyone there know exactly what she was, exactly who this woman they saw laughing and sipping wine truly was. But something held me back, that cold, logical voice reminding me I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. I watched from a distance, my mind racing with plans, ideas on how to make her pay for this betrayal. I thought about all the ways I could confront her, how I could reveal her lies in a way that would devastate her as deeply as she had wounded me. Every method felt satisfying, each more extreme than the last, but I knew I had to be smart about this. If I went off the rails, I'd end up getting nowhere, letting her squirm her way out of accountability. No, she needed to know the full weight of what she'd done. And for that, I had to stay in control. The next day, I called in sick to work and spent hours going through our financials, making note of every expense, every card charge that didn't add up. I pulled bank statements, reviewed credit card records. Each anomaly was like another crack in the illusion of our life together, the one she had broken beyond repair. There was even a hotel charge, a small boutique inn in a town just an hour away, somewhere she'd gone for a company retreat. I could see it now for what it was, a cheap excuse for her to carry on her affair without raising suspicions. I felt my grip tighten on the papers as I pictured her, in that hotel with him, all while I was home, oblivious, probably telling the kids that Mom would be back soon from her work trip. I remembered every story she'd given me, every tale of work dinners and long hours and travel, and now each one felt like a slap in the face. The audacity she had, to look me in the eye, to lie so smoothly, all while pretending we were this perfect couple, the image she'd built for our friends, our family. It was like I was seeing her for the first time, and the person I saw was a stranger, a selfish, reckless stranger who thought nothing of destroying everything we'd worked for. Days went by as I collected more evidence, putting together a portfolio of her infidelities that grew by the day. I didn't rush it, didn't let on that anything was amiss. I wanted her to feel secure, to think she'd fooled me. There was something almost satisfying in watching her go about her days, blissfully unaware that her lies were already unraveling. Then came the final piece of my plan. I booked a consultation with an attorney, laying everything out as plainly as possible. She listened, taking notes, and nodded as I detailed the evidence I had gathered. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, giving me a sympathetic but determined look. With this kind of evidence, you have a very strong case. You could easily file for divorce, take a fair share of the assets, maybe even more, given the circumstances. And given that you have children involved, the court might also look favorably on awarding primary custody. The words were like a balm to the wound that had been festering inside me. Just hearing someone else acknowledge the severity of her betrayal made it all the more real, solidified my determination to see this through. I walked out of that office feeling, for the first time, like I had a real plan, a path forward that wouldn't just free me from her lies but would also ensure she faced real consequences for what she had done. That night, I sat across from her at dinner, watching her laugh and make small talk as if everything were fine. I matched her energy, responding as if I were just as carefree, just as blissfully ignorant. But in my mind, I was already miles ahead, rehearsing how I'd reveal the truth, picturing her reaction, imagining the look on her face when she realized that her carefully constructed web of lies was about to collapse. She had no idea that everything was already set in motion, that her nights of wine and laughter with him would soon turn to regret and disbelief. The final piece came when I placed the papers, the evidence I'd meticulously gathered, along with the divorce documents, in a neat, sealed envelope. I knew exactly how I would deliver them, precisely when and where. There'd be no dramatic shouting, no public confrontation, it would be private, between us, the way she'd always wanted it. I'd hand her the envelope, watch her face as she opened it, and see the betrayal reflected back at her. She'd know, in that moment, that I'd seen through every lie, every deception. And I'd walk away, taking my life, my dignity, and everything I held dear with me. The day I planned for our confrontation, I woke with an eerie calm. Everything was in place, every detail accounted for. The envelope was on the counter, right where I'd be waiting for her. I had gone over this moment 1,000 times in my mind, rehearsed my words until they felt like armor, protecting me from the sting of her betrayal. This wasn't about rage or accusations, it was about setting myself free from the lies she had built around me. She came home that evening, casual, smiling, slipping off her shoes like it was any other night. There was a lightness in her step, the usual mask of normalcy she'd worn so flawlessly for so long. She didn't notice the envelope right away. Instead, she crossed the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and greeted me with that familiar, practiced warmth that now felt hollow. "How was your day?" she asked, her voice so convincingly sweet it nearly made me laugh. I forced a smile, gesturing toward the envelope on the counter. "We need to talk," I said, keeping my voice steady. Her eyes followed my gesture, settling on the envelope. She froze, her expression shifting as the first traces of unease flickered across her face. She took a slow breath, her smile fading. "What's that?" "Open it," I said, stepping back, giving her room to absorb what was coming. She reached for the envelope, her fingers trembling slightly as she tore it open. I watched her face closely, noting the way her brows knit together, her eyes scanning each page as the reality of what I'd laid out began to sink in. Photos of her with him, the charges for hotel rooms, the texts I'd seen, time-stamped with every lie she'd ever told me. It was all there, a record of every stolen moment, every betrayal. Her face went pale. She looked up, her eyes wide, almost as if she didn't recognize the man standing before her. For the first time in our marriage, she seemed at a complete loss for words. "What, how did you?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't think I'd find out?" I asked, each word slow and deliberate. "Did you really think I was that blind?" She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. She stared at me, guilt and fear flickering across her face in a way that would have broken me once, that might have made me soften and question everything. But now, all I felt was relief, a dark, satisfying relief in knowing she could no longer hide behind the veil of deception she'd created. "I gave you everything," I continued, my voice calm but cutting. "I trusted you. I built a life with you, built a family. And you threw it all away for, what? Some fling." The words came out cold, clinical, the way you might describe a stranger's actions. She was, after all, just a stranger to me now. She took a shaky breath, the guilt transforming into something else, something like defiance. "It wasn't like that," she said, her voice a desperate whisper. "It was just. I don't know. I felt trapped. I needed something more. I was losing myself." "Losing yourself?" I repeated, the irony twisting in my chest. "So you found yourself with him? That's the story you're going with?" "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she replied, her eyes pleading, her hands trembling as she clutched the papers. "I never wanted to hurt you." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "You didn't want to hurt me, but you did it anyway. And you lied, over and over, each lie bigger than the last. How did you think this would end?" She dropped her gaze, unable to meet my eyes. The silence stretched between us, thick with all the words she didn't have, the excuses she knew wouldn't work. In that quiet, I could feel the years of our life together unraveling, each memory tainted by the betrayal she'd buried so deeply until now. "I didn't want to hurt the kids," she said softly, as if that somehow made it better. "The kids?" I repeated, my anger rising. "You think they won't be hurt when they find out their mother was sneaking around, lying to their father? You think they won't remember the nights you were working late, how distant you'd become?" I shook my head, taking a breath to keep myself steady. "You don't get to pretend you did this for them." She was silent, her face twisted with regret, maybe even shame, though I wondered if it was just for herself. If she was only realizing now what she'd risked, how much she'd lost. I waited, giving her the chance to speak, to somehow explain the unexplainable. Maybe if you'd been there for me more, she began, her voice wavering. I shook my head sharply, cutting her off. Don't you dare, I said, my voice low and steady. Don't you dare try to pin this on me. I was there, every day, every night. I built this life for you, for our family, and you chose to walk away from it, piece by piece. That was all you. She shrank back, the defensive anger fading, replaced by something like desperation. She took a step toward me, reaching out as if she could somehow bridge the chasm she'd created. Please, she whispered, her voice breaking. Don't do this. We can fix it. We can go to counseling, try to make it right. Make it right? I repeated, almost laughing. How? By pretending this never happened? By pretending you didn't betray every promise we ever made to each other? We can start over, she pleaded, her eyes filling with tears, her voice trembling with a sadness that felt hollow to me now. Please, for the kids, for everything we've built together. I stared at her, letting her words sink in, the desperation in her eyes, the panic in her voice. A part of me, the part that had once loved her, that still remembered the life we'd shared, wanted to believe her, wanted to reach out, to tell her we could somehow undo the damage. But that part of me was buried now, hidden beneath the wreckage of her lies. There was nothing left to salvage, nothing left worth saving. I'm done, I said quietly, each word like a stone dropping between us. I'm done pretending, done trusting, done loving someone who doesn't even know what that means. Her face crumpled, the reality of my words sinking in. She reached out again, but I stepped back, putting distance between us, knowing that no amount of begging or pleading could change what she'd done. I've already filed the papers, I said, nodding to the envelope in her hands. You'll find everything you need in there. The terms, the custody arrangements, everything. She looked down at the papers, her hands shaking, her expression one of horror as the full weight of what she'd lost crashed down on her. I felt a grim satisfaction watching her, seeing the shock, the regret that had come far too late. Please, she whispered one last time, her voice barely audible. Please don't leave me. But there was nothing left to say, nothing left to give. I looked at her one last time, a stranger standing in the place of the woman I'd once loved. And then, without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving her to face the ruins of the life she'd destroyed. As I walked out of the house, shutting the door on the life I thought we'd built, a strange calm washed over me. I'd expected to feel anger, maybe sadness, even regret, but all I felt was relief, a kind of freedom that I hadn't anticipated. I drove through the quiet streets, letting the hum of the engine fill the silence, the weight of our broken marriage lifting with every mile. I checked into a small hotel on the outskirts of town. My phone buzzed a few times with her calls and texts, but I ignored each one, determined to keep this night for myself. Tomorrow, I'd call my lawyer, make arrangements to start fresh, maybe find a new place, one that wasn't filled with memories of her lies. For the first time in months, I slept soundly. The next morning, I decided to check my messages, expecting more of her pleas, maybe a string of apologies that would fall flat. But among her messages was one from a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, thinking it was another spam text, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it and immediately felt my heart stop. Hey man. This is Aaron. Look, I don't know how else to say this, but there's something you need to know about Jenna. Call me when you can. I froze. Aaron was a friend from work, a guy I'd known for years but hadn't spoken to in a while. He was a good guy, one of the few people I'd actually trust with the truth of what had happened. I took a deep breath and dialed his number. He answered on the first ring, his voice low and cautious. Hey, I'm glad you called. Look, I don't want to get involved in your personal stuff, but I think you need to hear this. What is it? I asked, my stomach tightening as he spoke. It's about Jenna. I know you filed for divorce, and I know you think she was cheating, but, there's more to it than that. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. It turns out, she's been seeing someone else, yes, but it wasn't for the reasons you think. What are you talking about? I asked, feeling a mix of confusion and dread. A couple of months ago, Jenna came to me, asking for advice about you. She was worried. She said you'd been distant, that you seemed stressed, almost paranoid. She thought you were hiding something. And then she mentioned she'd seen you, coming out of a lawyer's office. My mind spun. A lawyer's office? I'd been there weeks ago, after I had all the evidence of her affair. She must have known I was onto her, must have put it together before I even had a chance to confront her. Aaron continued, his voice heavy. She started seeing a therapist. Apparently, she wanted to work on her marriage, but she was afraid to talk to you directly, worried you'd shut her out. And, she said she was planning to talk to you that weekend. She said she wanted to fix things, that she still loved you and wanted to make it right. Wait, I interrupted, struggling to process his words. Are you saying she wasn't actually cheating on me? No, she was, Aaron said, sighing. But it wasn't some long-term thing. She said it started during one of your rough patches, some guy from her work. She told me she cut it off weeks ago. She was feeling guilty, but she didn't want to lose you. That's why she'd been acting strange lately, she was scared of what would happen if you found out. She thought you'd leave her. My chest tightened, an ache forming in the pit of my stomach. The betrayal was real, yes, but the intent wasn't what I'd thought. I had been so consumed by my anger, so focused on catching her in her lies, that I hadn't stopped to consider that she might have been just as lost, just as confused as I was. I felt a wave of nausea as I thought back to our confrontation, the look on her face when I'd handed her the papers, her tearful pleas for forgiveness. I'd taken her guilt as evidence of her selfishness, never realizing that, maybe, she'd been genuinely afraid of losing me. I had been so determined to make her face the consequences that I hadn't left any room for reconciliation. Look, Aaron said, his tone gentle. I'm not saying you should forgive her or that what she did was okay. But I thought you should know. Maybe it's not as black and white as you thought. The call ended, leaving me alone in the silence, grappling with a mixture of guilt, confusion, and regret. I didn't know what to think, didn't know what to feel. I'd spent weeks collecting evidence, building a case against her, shutting down any possibility of redemption. But now, all I could think about were the nights we'd spent together, the memories we'd built, and the small chance that maybe, just maybe, there was something left worth saving. I drove back to the house, my hands shaking as I pulled into the driveway. Her car was gone, probably parked at her mother's, where she'd fled after our confrontation. I let myself in, the emptiness of the home swallowing me as I walked through the rooms, each one a silent reminder of the life we'd shared. On the counter, a note was propped up, her handwriting neat and careful. If there's any chance, if there's anything left, I'll be waiting. For the first time, I felt the cracks in my own resolve, the possibility that maybe I'd been wrong, that maybe I'd let my anger blind me to something I'd never understand if I didn't give it a chance. I drove to her mother's, parked outside, and took a deep breath. I didn't know what I'd say, didn't know if I'd have the strength to forgive her. But I knew one thing for sure, I owed it to myself, to our children, and to the years we'd shared to find out. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding, bracing myself for whatever came next.